YouTube, how are you now? Sean back here from the EDC Den. Welcome back to the channel, one and all. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be looking at some traditional knives. This is going to be a little discussion, I guess, on knife collecting. I thought it would be fun. When I say fun, I mean for the traditional knife nerds out there like myself. So I just thought it would be fun to go through these traditional knives and nitpick them a little bit and try to go through the checklist of criteria of what makes a great traditional knife. Maybe this will be helpful for some people who are new to traditional knives or knives in general. So we'll just go through a little list of things to look for in traditional knives, what makes them great, what makes them not so good. Please stick around till the end of the video because we'll talk about some of the intangibles. You know, it's not all based on just what you see. There's other factors involved when choosing a great traditional knife. Just before we start, guys, I want to say that, of course, I'm not a professional by any means. I collect knives as a hobby. I would like to hear in the comments of anything I missed, because I'm definitely going to miss some things. Some things that might be important to me may not be as important to you. So I'll try and cover as much as possible, but please let me know in the comments what I missed. So let's try to do this from tip to tail. So let's start with the tip and the blade. This is a Case Mini copper lock, so when we're checking the blade, you know, we're probably going to want to know what type of steel it is. Is it a carbon steel? Is it a stainless? This happens to be the True Sharp stainless steel from Case. You can also have, you know, the modern super steels. You can have more budget-friendly steels. So that's something that most of us would pay attention to. Another thing would be the tip of the blade. Is it rounded or pointy? This one is rounded, very rounded. Case can be known for their rounded points. Unfortunately, this guy is definitely rounded. A really great knife altogether, especially great if you still have a waterbed. Anybody out there with a waterbed? So let's just compare this rounded tip to one that is not so rounded. This would be more of what I'm looking for, sharpened all the way to the end, nice and pointy. I could actually get into my skin there and get a splinter out if I had to. So check your tips, guys. Just a tip. While we're still on the blade, might as well check the grind. A nice grind on this one, nice and even. It's, I don't know what the proper term would be, but it's deep enough, you know, it's not just a little hairline bevel that's been sharpened. This is a good millimeter or two there. Let's see if it's consistent on the other side, which it looks to be. So a nice grind on that one in comparison to this one. Like I said, this is more like a little hairline grind. It's a nice thin blade, but I do like to see the grinds come up a little bit higher generally. I would also check for nicks and blade wrap. So sometimes if you accidentally slam the blade closed, it can come into contact with the back spring on the inside and flatten out a little portion of the grind. This one doesn't seem to have that issue, nor does it seem to have any little nicks out of it. I normally check that just by using the top of my fingernail here. So if that's nice and smooth as you run it across, then you've got no nicks or damage to the blade. If there is something, you'll feel your nail catch, and you can just easily touch up something like that with a stone, some sharpening rods. And while we're still on the blade, is the blade sharp? That's very important. This is a knife after all, and we expect it to cut things. So are you buying a used knife with a dull blade that you're going to have to work on? Are you buying a brand new knife that's coming with a toothy edge that you're going to have to work on? Or is the edge in good condition, nice and sharp out of the box? Just another thing to pay a bit of attention to. We can also look for scratches and blade rub on the blades. This might be more common in knives with multiple blades, like a Stockman. This one I know does have some scuffs on it, some scratches. You can see things are getting a little bit tight with the 3 blades in there. Let's see what we got for scratches. Yeah, there's one. Again, doesn't really take away from the function of the knife for cutting anyway. It might affect the function when you're closing. Let's see if this one still closes nicely. It does. I believe there's also some rub on this blade. Yes, you can see it there. So if I do close this one slowly enough, sometimes it does get hung up on the other blade. Like that. And then it just takes a little push to get it in. But most of the time you're going to be folding the knife like so, and it's going to drop in naturally by itself. It's not going to stop it from doing that. Just another thing to pay attention to, whether your blades are rubbing and you've got some marks. Again, these are some pretty nitpicky things, and by no means will this affect entirely if I purchase a knife or not, whether it's new or used. You can see I've got a selection here, and most of them are not perfect, but you kind of pick and choose what you can live with. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. All right, moving on to blade centering. That is a big one. We see that in all the videos, whether it's traditional or modern knives. Does the blade center up when it's closed? So you're simply letting a knife close and seeing if the blade is lined up between the liners. In this case, it is right down the middle, but that is not always the case. There you've got this blade, it's venturing over to the left. Not rubbing, but not perfectly centered. What about blade play when the blade is open? So when you hold the blade of the knife and give it a wiggle, can you feel any movement in the pivot area? This one is nice and solid. Sometimes you'll have to tolerate just a little bit of movement. If you have too much movement, you can always pinch the bolsters like I've done with this one. It will make the pin show proud a little bit, which you can probably buff, maybe just a little bit of peening that with a hammer to mushroom it out so the same issue doesn't reoccur. You would just kind of peen the edges of that and then buff it out. I haven't got there yet. This knife functions quite well as it is, apart from the little rubbing issues, but since I tightened the pivot, there's no more blade play whatsoever. This used to rock back and forth a little bit, but now it's nice and tight. Blade play for me is one of those things where I just can't handle it. Like you see here, I'll do pretty much anything to fix it on my own. I've even sent a couple knives back due to excessive blade play, and I'm not one to generally send knives back, so I do know that is an important one for me. So while we are in the pivot area, what about when the blade tang meets the back spring? So sometimes we'll check if that is all nice and flush and fitting properly. Here it looks great. Everything is nicely squared off and flush. Sometimes you'll see where it's a little bit messier. You can see the corners are kind of rounded off here. And the spring is a little bit proud from the tang, so you can feel a little bit of uneven transition there. Again, not the end of the world. We're just kind of looking for problems at this point, but that is something to look for. And smooth transitions is something you could look for throughout the knife, whether it's pins or shield, bolsters, where the back springs meet the liners and the covers. This GEC number 23 trapper is quite a fine example of just nice smooth transitions. Everything feels really great to the touch, nothing stands out. While we're here at the back spring, we'll talk about the back spring termination. And that's just how nicely squared off these back springs are. So a really good example of nicely done back spring terminations here by GEC. Let's compare that to a case trapper. That's done all right as well, but we can see some little gaps on the case version here. The tops are not quite as flush and squared off. I told you we were going to get picky, guys. I warned you. We're getting picky. While we're here with the back spring of this GEC, you can see that there's no gaps. Everything is nice and smooth and flush. Compare that to this Robert Class large Stockman. Completely different price category. You've got kind of the high end at the top, a more budget friendly option on the bottom with the Class knife. And you can see a few little issues with spacing, a little bit of gap there. If I held this bottom one up to the light, I would definitely see some light coming through. But not so for the GEC on top. And what about the action on a knife, right? The walk and talk, the pull weight, which means how hard are the blades to get out. Those can really vary from knife to knife. On this GEC 23, the pulls are nice, maybe about a 7 or so. On this one here, the pull is more like a 8.5 or 9, so pretty difficult to get the blades out of this one. Nice and easy to get them out of here, despite it being the same knife, although they are made in different locations, so different people and different machines putting the knives together. So there's the pull, like I said, about a 7 or so. Great action, nice snap open. You can hear the snap open. Flies into the half stop. Very, very snappy. I won't let that fully close, but it's very snappy on the close as well. This French knife, Forge de la Yole. Nice and snappy on the close. On the open, not so snappy, a little squishier. You don't get that thwack or snap when you open it. Maybe I just need to clean something in there. Action on this case back pocket is excellent. Probably a 6 to get that open. You've got a nice half stop. Nice solid click when you fully open it. And good action into the half stop and closing. So nice walk and talk on this one. That can be an important factor if you like to kind of fidget with your knives a little bit. It's nice to have a knife with nice action. Goes without saying, but okay guys, we covered a lot of points. I'm excited to hear from you what I missed. One of the final things I'll talk about here is just the X factor when you're looking for a knife. Again, whether it's secondhand, whether it's brand new, does the knife have that X factor that really speaks to you? These 3 knives are the same knives. I got this one first. It was my first GEC in general, and I just fell in love with it. These beautiful wood covers and this awesome beaver shield, something just spoke to me about this knife. So I ended up buying it. I absolutely love it. It's just a beautiful knife, and it really did call out my name, and I just had to have it. And a lot of times when you get that strong feeling, you get the knife in hand and you realize your instincts were right. This is absolutely one of my favorite knives in my collection. So I'm glad I jumped on it when I had the opportunity. So whether the knife meets the criteria or not, does it have that X factor that speaks to you? Maybe a loved one or family member is gifting you the knife and that makes it special. Maybe there's a fun little shield on it that speaks to you. All kinds of reasons why a knife can stand out from the thousands and millions of knives out there, and it calls out to you specifically. Okay guys, so that's going to do it for today. And just a little final thought, I guess, is that A great knife does not have to meet all the criteria that we talked about today. This is a case trapper that I got several years ago. It was my first case knife, not my first traditional, but my first case knife, and it doesn't meet a lot of the criteria. It's got a little bit of blade wobble. I'm sure there's some gaps if I look closely enough. Maybe a little bit of rubbing and the grind isn't perfect, but this is one of the knives that I carry the most, and I picked this out in person. It's a pretty good version of a case knife, but it's certainly not perfect. When you're looking for your next traditional knife, you can certainly look at the criteria that we talked about today, but it's not the be all and end all. We want a knife to be as good as it can be, but it's likely not going to meet all of the points that we talked about today. So it's just important to still pick knives that appeal to you, even if they aren't perfect. You're still going to love carrying them. And if the knife doesn't meet all of the criteria that you deem to be important in a pocket knife, there's still lots of room there for enjoying the knife and enjoying the collection. A lot of the things that we talked about today are very minor. You can either fix them up yourself or you can learn to live with them. My buddy Knife Detector would remind us that personally we all have our little scuffs in life, and why can't our pocket knives reflect that? And I think that's a great sentiment for the collector, so I think we'll leave it right there for today. This has been a bit of a long video, guys. Thanks for hanging in there with me. We'll see you real soon in the next video. Take care.